Thank you, Carla. Thank you very much. So, first of all, logistics or mechanical stuff. Is this mic working? Yeah?
It could be
No?
louder.
So I don't know how they, you just told me to put it on. Oh, there it goes. Good. Okay, good. Great. Because I like to walk around a little bit. I kind of engage a little bit. Yeah, my cards are here. You can come up and get it later or at the table. I think Jen is going to have a table with some books afterwards. This is the book, so you know what you're looking for. And if for some reason you don't get a copy of it tonight, you just literally just Google Overcoming the Fear of Death. And I'm like the first 2 or 3 pages on Google. If you Google my name, I was telling somebody this just tonight at the reception. I was catapulted to the top of the Google search result for the words fear of death or anxiety about death because I spoke at the Commonwealth Club. Anybody here know what the Commonwealth Club is in San Francisco? It's been around since 1903, I think. Teddy Roosevelt, when he was president, inaugurated the opening and so forth. Anyway, I spoke there, and Business Insider showed up and interviewed me. So Business Insider shows up and interviews a fairly unknown person like me in this field, and I became the #1 Google search result for fear of death overnight for about 1.5 years. That was in 2015. So I'm still on like the first page, but anyway, so if you don't remember anything and you didn't get a copy of the book and like, what was that guy talking about at dinner? I can't remember. Just Google my name or Overcoming the Fear of Death and you'll find me. Easy. So one thing that's not in my bio, actually, that I should mention to you, a little self-disclosure. So I did retirement tax planning for a while. I did ERISA stuff, which is kind of, those of you who, we any ERISA people here? ERISA people, we are kind of unusual. First of all, we got tax lawyers here. So tax lawyers are unusual, right? I mean, tax lawyers are unusual. They don't think they're unusual, but other lawyers in the law firm think tax lawyers are unusual. I used to work in some of the MLaw 100 firms. And then ERISA lawyers are even like more weird than, in the food chain. But anyway, so I did do that many years ago. I've been doing my nonprofit work full time now for about 5 years. So I was in the corporate legal world for a number of decades, long enough to put both my kids through college and that whole routine that many of you are either in or have been in or are about to engage in. You know what I'm talking about. How many people here have had clients who don't want to talk about death? It's about everybody, right? It's like, don't want to talk about it. Now, I'm curious, how many people here, it's a subset question, how many people here have clients who've actually expressed to you that they have a fear of death and therefore they don't want to talk about it, or they have a fear of death and dying? Yeah, clients have actually expressed that sometimes. Sometimes they'll get open with you. Very often they don't, right? Because we live in a culture, especially U.S. culture, but it's endemic, it's worldwide, of conflict avoidance, right? I used to be a VP at the American Arbitration Association, so I was in that whole arena as well. I've worn many, many hats. So here's the thing. And let me ask you a sub-question to that. Last question. How many people here are uncomfortable talking about death and dying with their clients if their clients brought that up to them head on? I'm not talking about trust in the states, because maybe you're dealing with trust in the states. Maybe you're dealing with various forms of end-of-life, important end-of-life, critical end-of-life issues and so on. I'm not talking about substantively. I'm talking about how many people here would be uncomfortable if their client said, look, I'm freaked out about death and dying, what do I do? So what I want to do tonight is I always tailor my talks. So I'm tailoring my talk to you because I know, because I used to do somewhat of the work that some of you do, I know what it's like dealing with this aspect of professional services in end-of-life care and so forth. And I know how difficult it is. I also sold life insurance before I went to law school, so yeah. So talk about trying to sell something that nobody wants to pay money for and think about it. Anyway, premiums. All right. So what I want to do, my objective tonight, to tailor this, I want to try to give you some tips by looking through the lens that I talk about in my book. But I'm going to take my book and I'm going to tailor it a little bit tonight. And I want to give you some tips on how to talk to people who don't want to talk about death and dying. Or if they do, and they have a different belief system about death and dying, and you'll hear what I mean when I say talk about belief system, because I'm not talking about religious or cultural beliefs, okay? But if they have a different belief system than you do fundamentally about death and dying, how do you talk to them without stepping on their toes? Because, we're in professional services, right? Or I used to be. And what's professional services about? It's about relationship. It's about trust. Right? And there's an intimacy. It's got to be a connection between you and your client, as you all know, in order for them to listen to what you're advising them and act on it, right? Even if you have their best interests at heart, and you know that they need to create a will. I was just talking to somebody tonight, and he was telling me about at the reception, he was saying that 30% of people who died in the last year in the state had wills. 30% had wills. 70% didn't. So how do you deal with this and bridge this? So I want to try to give you some tips in ways to look at this and talk about this in a way that makes you feel comfortable. Because if you're feeling more comfortable, then it's going to inherently make them feel more comfortable. They'll be more open. They'll tell you stuff that they maybe normally wouldn't tell you, even substantively, about their family needs or personal needs and so forth. It's going to help you as a professional meet their needs better, right? It kind of cascades that way. All right. So, yes, you're in the business of estate planning in various ways. But really, I'm an educator, and you're an educator too. You're there to educate your clients in various ways. So, it's the old, the Walt Disney, Disneyland thing of are we in the amusement park business? No, we're not in the amusement, they're in the entertainment business. And then they got into movies and they got into all other stuff, right? So we're all educators here. I'm an educator, you're an educator with your clients. And yes, you have certain expertise in the estate planning area. All right. Yeah, it's the elephant in the room, isn't it? It's death, dying, it's that elephant over there that they don't want to talk about. But your job is to get them to think about it and to talk about it. How many people seen Annie Hall, the movie Annie Hall, Woody Allen? You remember that line? And I think it's in a library. I got to watch it again. I'm pretty sure it happens in a bookstore or something like that, where Woody Allen says, "I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to be there when it happens." Right? I love Woody. Here's the thing. How did I get into this? So you've heard enough about my background to know that I have what we could call a diverse background, maybe even a checkered background. But how did I get into this? I got into this my third year of law school, and I back-ended into this. This is not something that was like a career path I thought about. My third year of law school, my mother died. And those of you lawyers, law school is tough enough, right? Third year, you want to get out and get going and so forth, but law school it's not a cakewalk, right? So it's difficult enough. My mom was dying. She was diagnosed with cancer in a form, and it was at a stage where she died very quickly. So it was a shock to everybody. It was a real shock to me. And I still work in, those of you who know Boston law firms, I was working at Bingham, Dane and Gould at the time, part-time, and then I worked at Choate Hall full-time after that. So I was working at Bingham, and I go down to Bingham, and nobody would know that I was dealing with my mom who was dying and then died. But after she died, I don't know, I was talking to somebody at law school, one of my classmates or something, and I said, "Hey, how you doing?" You know how you say, "Well, I'm doing doing fine. We always say that, right? You just want to get into it, and sometimes you intentionally don't want to get into it. In this case, sometimes I didn't. In this case, I didn't want to. But at one point, I just said to somebody randomly, one of my friends, I said, "Yeah, I'm doing fine, but my mom just died," and I kind of said it matter-of-factly. And boom, he said, "Whoa, my grandfather just died. I was really close to him." And another said to somebody else, it was like, "Oh, my brother just died in a motorcycle accident in Utah," whatever. And people start opening up. Self-disclosure tends to do that, right? And so that started this cascade for me, where I started talking to people more openly to them instead of just shutting myself down, which I was doing, we tend to do. And that I realized that started helping me. I started talking to them, that helped them. They started telling other people that they should talk to me, and that's how this whole thing started 35 years ago. And so while doing my law jobs, my corporate jobs, people would call me up and say, "You don't know me, but Ken said I should call you and talk to you." And so that's how I started. So I just started trial and error, basically. Experience through trial and error and learning what worked for people. All right? The other part of this that's material to the book, because the title of the book, the full title of the book, is Overcoming the Fear of Death Through Each of the Four Main Belief Systems. So I'm going to tell you what the four main belief systems are in a sec. But here's why I came up with the four main belief systems. Because when I started talking to people, I started noticing people would get into these, arguments over, "No, that's not what happens when you go to heaven. This is what happens with, no, you don't go to heaven. This is what," and people start, even Christians don't agree, and then Buddhists don't agree with each other about, what's exactly this and that, so forth. So I observed this, and I said, you know what? We should be talking more openly about death and dying. This does not make sense to me. How can we talk more openly about it? Because it's going to happen to everybody. And so many of us are walking around freaked out about it, and people are just burying it. How can we talk more openly about it? So I came up with these four belief systems. And so here are the four belief systems, all right? I'm just going to run through them real quickly, and then I'm going to ask you for, you don't have to, but show of hands if you feel comfortable. I'm just curious where people are at in terms of these four belief systems I'm going to lay out. And then I'll get into them, each of them in greater detail, okay? So the first belief system was my dad's belief system, and a lot of people have this. My dad was a scientist, my dad was an engineer, my mom was a chemist, and so the physical science belief is one life, body dies, mind shuts off. That's it in a nutshell, right? Okay, that's belief system number one. And I'm going to come back to it and we'll talk about it in terms of fear of death and so forth and dying. That's the first belief system. Second belief system is, I call it the fear of continued existence. So that's where people believe that they are going to have a continuation, some sort of afterlife. I let people define it however they want. They want to call it heaven, nirvana, Valhalla, whatever they want to call it. Depending on what culture they're from, religion, so it doesn't matter. But some afterlife, okay? But there's fear associated with it. And again, I don't tell people the fear could be this, that. People know what their fears are. People can have fears associated with that for various reasons, okay? But it's the fear of continued existence. So belief in an afterlife, but some fear. That's the second belief system. And so everybody falls in one of these four. It doesn't matter what culture or religion you are. These are fundamental. Third belief system, belief in an afterlife with no fear. Pretty much no fear. Okay with it. Maybe even looking forward to it. Okay? Who knows, right? Could be. Third belief system. Okay, fourth belief system, body dies, mind continues, mind still conscious, can make decisions, could even decide to come back in another physical form, reincarnation, past lives, future lives. That's the fourth belief system, okay? Everybody in the world falls somewhere in those four belief systems. Doesn't matter what religion, what culture you are. Now, it doesn't matter, quite frankly, it doesn't even matter whether you believe in God or not. You can still have one of those four belief systems and not believe in a God, creator, whatever, however you want to call God, okay? All right, so I use those as a lens to talk to people through. And now, I work with people in different ways. I work individually, so if I'm individual with a client, I work with people from 27 countries now. I do video conference, everything is remote. Most of my clients I've never met. And sometimes just the phone, sometimes it's video conference, whatever. But my first question always to them is, what's your belief system? I don't care if they even know about what my belief system is. That's irrelevant. So I take a different approach to this whole thing. It's not about belief-based me. It's about belief-based them. It's all about them. How can I help them? So here's a tip for you as professionals in the field is you listen. Listen for clues. And I'm going to come back and give you some more clues to each of those 4 belief systems. And then you can kind of tag that client, oh, I think they're probably, you just saying this to yourself, okay? It's not really, but unless you feel like, it depends on what kind of relationship you've got with them. But you're saying this to yourself, like, oh, I think they're one of the, okay, then that means X, Y, Z, okay? And that means I can talk to them this way without stepping on their toes, all right? So let's just quick show of hands. How many people first belief system? This is it, physical science belief, one life, that's it, okay. How many people second belief system? Belief in an afterlife, but a little bit afraid, not sure. Now, some people are not real, don't want to raise their hand, that's okay. Oh, by the way, you could be a fence sitter too. We'll come back to that, all right? Yeah, you could be in between, right? Okay, that happens all the time. Third belief system, believe in an afterlife, good with it. It's like, okay, great, it's fine, I'm okay. Yep, no fear. Yep, okay, good. Fourth belief system, reincarnation, past lives, future lives, believes that that's a possibility. Anybody? Yeah? Couple few people. Okay, great. I get a big enough group like this, I always get some people in all of the 4 groups. I gave a presentation, I was telling some folks at the reception tonight here. I gave a reception in Southern Illinois. For those of you, anybody knows about Southern Illinois, it's very Christian. Fundamentalist Christian. So I gave a in-house training to a group of 150 healthcare workers. And so I already knew, but I still did the show of hands. Interesting, out of the 150, let's realize that how many people go to church? About 148 of them raised their hand. And then I said, how many people fourth? I went through the fourth belief system. Anybody? I think it was 6 or 8 people. Right? Who knows? Right? And they were the gutsy ones who raised their hands there. So let's get into the belief systems in a little bit more detail. So as I said, first belief system, physical science belief. One life, that's it. Mind shuts off when the physical body dies. The belief is that the brain is the mind, and that's it. When the brain shuts off, the mind shuts off. It's it. They're one and the same when the body dies. All right? That was my dad's belief system. Now, what if you have a client who's afraid of death and has this belief system? What's it look like? What's it likely that they're going to say? How are they going to articulate this? It's going to sound something like this. This is it. One life. I got to make the most of it. I'm only here once. Okay? They'll say some variations of that. That was, as I said, my dad's belief. Now, first of all, the first thing to understand about people who have that belief system is they tend to be very material-oriented. I don't mean that they like buying lots of stuff. I don't mean materialistic. I mean material-oriented, meaning they tend to be very tied to the physical. Now that's a generalization. It's not absolutely true all the time. Some of the people can be very abstract thinkers as well, but that's less likely. Okay? It's just a generalization. They tend to be much more identified with their things. And so here's an approach. I'm going to share with you an approach that I've used successfully with folks who have the first belief system. And a lot of people will call me and they'll say they have the first belief system, and yet they have a fear of death. Okay? So here's what I say. Look, one of two things, and this is true for everybody, one of two things is going to happen when we die. So it's not rocket science, right? One of two things is going to happen when we die. Either mind's going to shut off, like that person may believe, or it's going to continue. It's binary. This is one of the few black and white points in life, right? Your mind's either going to shut off or it's not going to shut off when you physically die. Okay? Now, so let's say that you do firmly believe in that first belief system. Like my dad. He was I don't know if I'm mixing metaphors here, but he was a devout believer in the first belief system that this was it. End at when he dies. Okay? Now, if you have that, let's step back for a second. Fear. Let me define how I think of fear, okay? Fear, I define fear as the emotion caused by the anticipation of unhappiness. Okay? The emotion caused by the anticipation of unhappiness. Makes sense, right? Okay. Back to my dad. He believed in the first belief system. Well, if you believe in the first belief system as firmly, that's what I meant by devoutly, as my dad, then there's not going to be any experience after you physically die, right? So you should have no fear of death because there's going to be no experience. It's not going to be happy or sad. It's going to be zero experience if you really believe in that first belief system. And my dad did, and therefore, how do you think he lived his life? He just lived it. He didn't have any fear because he was one of these rare people, in my experience, rare, who really did have a firm belief in the first belief system. Most people are fence sitters. They believe in the first belief system, but then they say, but they'll say this to me. They'll say, I get this a lot. They'll say, but I'm afraid of oblivion. I'm afraid of oblivion now. Okay. So we deal with that. We need to unbundle that. Okay? So we'll get to that in a second. But if you have the first belief system and you smell that you're, or maybe you explicitly hear, you don't even sense it, that your client has the first belief system, if they really do, they're like an easy client for you. They should be, because then what's life all about? Life is about living now. Okay, so then it's planned to live your life fully right now, is what I would say. And in order to help you live your life fully right now, you need to do some planning for your children or whatever. Now, that's one angle. Doesn't always work, as you know, but the philosophy, the philosophical angle with them, however you articulate it, has to be around the fact that it's all about now, because that's their belief. All right, if they really do have the first belief system. Now, if very often they're fence sitters, and these are the ones who are more difficult, okay? Because they'll say to you stuff that makes you think that they're their first belief system, but as soon as they start expressing any fears about death or dying, then it's a red flag, okay? All right, that they're not really fully first belief. If they were, they wouldn't have any fears, and they would just deal with stuff, and they would get on with it, okay? Like my dad did. That's what I'm saying. He's rare. So here's what it looks like for second belief system. Remember, second belief system, fear of continued existence. So it looks like this. They say, I'm afraid to die. I don't know what's going to happen after I die. I'm not sure what happens. And I'm afraid of oblivion even. So people are afraid of like nothingness. They say, I believe in the first, they'll say this to me all the time. I'll say, I believe in the first belief system that this is it, but I'm afraid of oblivion afterwards. So I say, okay, let's unbundle this a little bit. So really what you're saying is, you have the first belief system, but you've got a foot in the other boat at the same time. Why? Because you're not sure, right? And they say, yeah, I'm not sure. So, and that's fine. Most people aren't sure. I tell people, look, none of us is sure. We're going to know when we know. When's that going to be? When you die, and you die, and I die. Well, at that moment, I say, when we each die, it's the most intimate, personal moment of our lives. It's us with ourselves, really. It's the most personal, intimate moment. So that's what we're going to know. But I'm about living now in the present, so what can I do to reduce the fear? Ideally eliminate it, but at least reduce it so that people's energy is not diverted. So the solution that I work with my clients is I tell them what you need to do to reduce the fear. There are a number of different conversations we could have substantively in terms of content, but in terms of experientially, what you need to do is what I call turn within. So that's my other, my nonprofit term, why I use that phrase, turning within. So the idea is turning within, and you can use many different techniques to turn within. You don't have to use my technique. Use many techniques. When I was talking to that fundamentalist Christian group in Southern Illinois, 150 of them, I said, how many people have been to church? 148 raised their hand. And I said, you go to church regularly. I said, you ever had a moment when you're in church when you're not praying and asking for something, but your eyes are closed and you feel larger than you usually feel. You feel more expanded than you usually feel, bigger than you usually are. Everybody raise their hand. I said, that's what I'm talking about. That's the ancient Greek sense of virtue. This idea of turning within and knowing thyself. The ancient Greeks talk about knowing thyself. A lot of people talk about knowing thyself, that phrase. But the ancient Greeks talked about virtue, like developing virtue. Not virtue like we think of in our culture today. Not like, oh, do this, don't do that, be a good person. No, that's not what they thought of virtue. They thought of virtue as knowing themselves, knowing the fabric of who they are as a personality in all these myriad different ways. That's how they talked about virtue. So that's another way of articulating what I'm talking about in terms of reducing this fear of continued existence, is by finding some method of turning within and increasing that knowingness of oneself in that ancient Greek sense. And what does that do? That creates more self-confidence, more inner peace. That starts to increase self-confidence, as I said, self-esteem, and reduce fear of uncertainty. Because if you distill fear of death down to one thing, I think it's fear of uncertainty. Not exactly knowing for sure, right? So we live in a world of uncertainty. Everything's uncertain all the time. We don't know if our favorite bread's going to be at the store, the favorite bread that I like, right? So, and yet somehow death, that fear of not knowing, looms really large in people, okay? All right, we come back to this later. Third belief system, let's talk a little bit about this. So, third belief system, no fear, but belief in an afterlife. So you may say, well, why do you even have to talk about that one? Well, first of all, it's good to know because you can identify a client who may have that belief, and then it's, you can talk to them in certain ways. I'm going to give you some tips on how to talk to them. But here's what it looks like. They'll say something like, I'm actually looking forward to going to heaven, or whatever they call it, or reuniting with my wife, or my husband, or my grandparents, or my dog. I just had a client who was in that mode. I'm looking forward to relaxing. I'm going on vacation. They may say something like that, like I'm going to go chill out, not having to work, not having to show up at work, right? So that's the third belief system. So what do I say? And I'm going to give you an example that's in my book. I'll give you the short version that's in my book of somebody I helped with this. So what I talk about is NDEs, near-death experiences, and visits from dead relatives. Now that sounds a little bit out there, but I'm going to tell you a couple of stories, and you can, if you've never had these experiences, and I'm going to tell you some experiences for people who I've interviewed for my book, okay? So then you can just say, well, I haven't had experiences, but in other words, if you have a client who starts talking to you about visits from dead relatives, and you kind of go, whoa, wait a minute. At least you've heard what I'm going to say to you, and you can say, well, there's this guy at this dinner meeting that I talked about, and he talked about this. At least so that you don't sound like like you're doing one of these things to your client, you know, mentally or emotionally. All right. So here's the thing. Let me talk about NDEs first, near-death experiences. So my graduate school roommate, we were friends in college. We both went to Dartmouth, and we both went to Yale graduate school. But Henry, his name was Henry, and is Henry. And when he was 8 years old, he had his tonsils out. So he told me this when he was in college, when we were in college together. Tonsils, right? People have had their tonsils. Well, probably a lot of you. If anybody's had their tonsils, a lot of people have their tonsils out, right? It's not this major risky surgery. He had his tonsils out, no problem. He goes home, mom feels badly for him. Henry just got his tonsils out, bakes a whole bunch of cookies for him. Some of the cookies are really crispy. He eats the cookie, severs his sutures. Henry's eight years old on the floor, hemorrhaging internally, swallowing the blood. Mom doesn't know what's going on other than that he's unconscious because she can't see the blood because he's swallowing the blood, right? So Henry told me that as soon as that happened, he was up on the ceiling looking at himself. He's 8 years old. He's on the ceiling observing himself on the floor, just unconscious, no blood, unconscious. And he remembered what his mom said, what his mom did. The doctors, this is back in the day when some of us here are old enough to know, when doctors actually did house visits, you know? You remember they actually went to you and visited you sometimes to check you out? Anyway, so she called the doctor came right over, and he said, he's lost so much blood, he's going in my car, and we can't wait for the ambulance. We can't dial whatever the equivalent of 911 was back then. We dial the operator, I don't know what to do. Anyway, so Henry remembered the whole thing. He was on the ceiling of the inside of the car, looking at his body. He remembered who said what to who, how many nurses and doctors were in the hospital room, and who came when, and what they did, and who was saying. He told his mother the whole conversation, everything afterwards. He was unconscious. That's a near-death experience, okay? So that's one. And I'm going to tell you another one. I'm going to give you the shorter version of this one. There's like a 4-page version of this one in my book. But here's the short version for the sake of time here. My friend Jay Peters. Actually, Jay, Kent, Washington. Yeah, here we are, both guys, realize. Jay had this near-death experience. I can't remember which hospital here in Seattle. So this is one of the Seattle hospitals. It's in the medical records, blah, blah, blah. I've had dinner with one of the doctors twice and talked to him probably 6 or 8 times on the phone. Okay? All right. Here's the experience. Jay, who was at the time, it was 2004 it happened, he was 54 years old. He died for 20 minutes. Anybody know anybody who's died for that long? No brain activity, no breathing, no heartbeat, no nothing. 20 minutes in the hospital, all wired up. So he's being measured and everything. So I mean, this is medically documented and everything. 20 minutes, dead. What happened was he was in the ICU for something. He had a lot of medical complications. He had type 1 diabetes since he was 11 years old. Those of you who know anybody with type 1 diabetes, it can cascade and create a lot of problems. He had a lot of medical problems. He was in ICU for something, I don't know what. And then he was out of the ICU, so he was okay. He's in whatever they call the next stage, you know, where he's before they let him out. And so he was in that next stage for the next week or something like that. And our friend Diane, who still lives in Kent, was sitting at his bedside. And he was dead, as I said, for 20 minutes. The doctors kept saying, just to go like this. Okay, everybody look at their watch. They're going to do time of death, right? They're going to, what's the official time of death? And every time they did that, Diane made something up and she'd go, I think I just saw a movie. Because she just had this feeling that he was going to come back. She had this feeling, okay? Anyway, so, he coded, obviously. 8 or 10 nurses, doctors and nurses ran into the room. They're monitoring him. They did the whole thing, paddles, the whole thing, the adrenaline, everything, nothing worked. 20 minutes, he's dead. He told me what during this experience, he left his body. He was out in space. Now, the reason I'm telling you this version of an NDE, a near-death experience, because it was very different from my friend Henry's experience. There's a range. So if you hear people talk about near-death experiences or NDEs, and they say, whoa, no, it's this way. It's not this way. This is this huge range. And I've heard every possible variation of that in that range. This one's very different. He just was, boom, out in space, he said. And his mind, or whatever, his consciousness, he's out in space, and he said there's more stars than he could ever see on the darkest night he'd ever seen in the mountains in Washington here. And he heard something musical that he liked. Diane was sitting next to him. She was singing next to him. And she started singing a song, this is a little interesting factoid, that they both knew and liked. He told me that when he was out there wherever, having this experience, he started heard a song, he didn't recognize it. He didn't recognize it, like, interesting. Because it goes to the experience when that I've seen many, many, many times when people talk about these types of experiences, they get disoriented. They don't remember. They just like, where am I? What happened? You know. Anyway, so he's out there, and he says here, he starts going towards it, and he just shoot. I'm giving you the short version. He just shot back into his body, sat up in the bed like Frankenstein. The doctors and nurses all screamed. Male, female, young and old. They all screamed, right? And because he's been dead for 20 minutes. Now, let me back up. You understand, you look, I have this fact in the book, NIH, National Institute for Health. 4 to 6 minutes. That's pretty much the max. It's you die for 4 to 6 minutes, they bring you back. Okay, that's the window. That's the window you got. 6 minutes, you come back. You might still be alive, but 99% of the time, brain damage. Okay, you got brain, you paralysis or brain, you can't speak, whatever. Okay, 20 minutes. All right, so they all scream. He sits up in his bed and he's yelling at Diane. He says, Diane, where am I? Who are these people and what are they doing here? And so he totally disoriented. He'd been in the hospital for 2 weeks. So that's his NDE. There's a range of them. So I just tell you this, why? Not because I'm trying to convince you that the mind continues after the body dies. I talk about this in my book. I give people data points. I'm like a library. I get this information, I share it with people, you figure it out. I'm not telling you, I don't have the answer to the test. I don't have the answer to the test. I have all kinds of information that you may not have, and I'll share it with you, but then you figure that out, right? So here's the thing. Back to this example I was going to give you of how I helped somebody. He had the first belief system. He was a Vietnam War vet, flew Cobra attack helicopters. So, those are gunships, okay? It's like there's no pulling any punches here. It's just gunships, Gatling guns, rockets, okay? 2-seater. He was a pilot. And so Jimmy, I asked Jimmy, it was about 4 to 6 weeks before he died. We didn't know when he was going to die, of course, but it happened to be about 4 to 6 weeks before. I said, Jimmy, what do you think is going to happen? He was still lucid at that time, obviously, but he was bedridden. And he said, he described the first belief system. I think that's it. This is it. I said, that's cool. Okay, you're like my dad, same belief system. He said, but I'm not sure. And I said, okay, you're not sure. That's okay. That's cool too, because when and if you let go, because he was very much at the end, he knew he was going. I said, you'll find out. Then I told him the Henry 8-year-old tonsil story. I told him that. He goes, wow, that's really far out. That's really crazy. Interesting. And I said, yeah. And so I planted a seed in Jimmy's head. I said, yeah. I said, so if you think about it, if the mind continues after the body dies, what are we talking about? If that's even true, then the mind is continuing in some form of energy, right? Because where energy is not a physical form, because the physical body is now dead, turned to dust, buried, or cremated, whatever. So it continues, bless you, as energy. Then what I've heard, Jimmy, is that I planted a seed in his head. I said I've heard, Jimmy, that of stories of people like playing with light switches and stuff after they die. So Donna, his wife's name was Donna. So if you want to communicate with Donna, maybe you could, I don't know, I'm just throwing an idea out to you, Jimmy. So Jimmy died. I was there literally at his bedside, 9:45 in the morning. He died. I was there with Donna and her daughter Kim. And a week, 2 weeks later, Donna's out going to dinner with Jimmy's sister. And it's night time, so it's dark. She's driving the car to go pick up her sister-in-law. And the light switch here, the dome light, goes on the passenger seat. And she goes, she turns it off and she says, "Jimmy, is that you?" And then the light went on her. So he still does this, or somebody, or something still does. We don't know for sure, right? This is like, who knows? But and it happens through her light over her when she reads. Donna reads every night before she goes to bed. Same thing happens. So who knows? It's another data point. I'm just throwing data points out. Does this proof? It's not proof. It's just another data point. But these kind of visits, can happen. But if you have somebody, my advice to you as a professional service provider in this area, if somebody expresses that they do have a belief like this in the afterlife and that they don't have any fears, those are a couple of examples that you could share with them, even though they're not your experiences. You could say, "I heard this guy and he said something about it," so that they know that you don't think that they're crazy, even if you do think they're crazy. But you can kind of say that to lead them to believe that maybe you actually are in their camp. You're empathetic a little bit, yeah, at least empathetic with their belief system. Okay, because even in that case, I reinforce their belief because they may have a remnant of fear. That's all. That's possible as well, right? So, fourth belief system. What's that look like? That's the reincarnation one. They say, "Well, I want to come back in my next life as a whatever," or "I went to a psychic once and she told me I was a such and such in a past life." And so here's two concepts that I talk about here that you could share with somebody if you're dealing with somebody who has past life or reincarnation beliefs. One is something called recognition memories. I call it recognition memories. And it's like, I think it's maybe the precursor of potentially remembering potentially past life things. Let's keep saying potentially because we don't know for sure, right? All right. So recognition memory, what's that? Recognition memory is like, you ever been, probably how many people have ever been to a place and you go, "Man, I've been here before. And I know I've never been here before." Everybody have had that experience? It's kind of weird. It's like an advanced deja vu. It's like a more intense deja vu experience, right? Or I have a friend, she has it with things, with certain kind of jewelry. Or I have some other friends, they have a certain kind of music that they've never heard before, and they hear it like, there's something really weirdly familiar, oddly familiar about that. That's what I call a recognition memory. And you can have those kinds of like little pre-deja vu, precursor kind of experiences, all right? And then you could just, with a person, you used to have full-blown past life memories. So, where people were they remember being a slave on a Carthaginian warship, not knowing when this war was, other than that it was a long, long, long time ago. Okay? And so I had this memory that I was black, I was a slave, I could see my skin, and all I remembered that I was roasting in the sun and on a big body of water. And I didn't know where it was. I just knew it was a big body of water. I was on a piece of wreckage, and I was roasting in the sun. I could feel myself dying physically in the sun. And so later I had memories of ramming ships, and so then I just looked stuff up. You know, I kind of Wikipedia stuff, or back then, this was so long ago, it was like Encyclopedia Britannica did, you know? And like, oh, that's exactly what happened, is like figure out like where it was. So 2,300 years ago or something like that. So it was crazy. It was like completely out of the blue. It was just like I'm minding my own business. And where does this come from? I don't know. Like, but here's my point. Here's my point. And if anybody here has ever had any experiences, or if in the future you ever have any experiences like this, I strongly recommend, number one, I take the who cares attitude towards it. It's like cocktail party talk. It's not like here to impress people. It's like, so what? So the main point that I take away is from a practical standpoint is that how can that inform me better about who I am now as Kelvin Chin? Because it doesn't matter who I was, 2,300 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 500 years, it doesn't matter. It matters who I am now, and how does that inform me now? So what I've taken away, so here's a little self-disclosure for you, from that experience, because what I remember is that I willed myself to not die, even though I was physically dying, being roasted in the sun, and I mentally willed myself to stay alive. It was mental. It was like mind over matter. You've heard that phrase? That's what I remember. And then I got picked up by some fishermen or something. But that's what I remember. So I've used that will to survive 5 layoffs since I was 50 years old. This company gets bought by this company, this law firm gets bought by, merges with this law firm, and I'm the C-level blah blah, and they already got a C-level so-and-so officer, and then I'm on the street, right? So I have pulled myself out of the ashes 5 times since I was 50 years old. So, but I've willed that because I've drawn from that memory the power of what I can do if I put my mind to it. All right? So that's my advice to people. It's like, because otherwise, who cares? It's just cocktail party talk. I don't care about that, So what's the bottom line of all of this? Bottom line is to live life more fully now. Doesn't matter if people believe in past lives, don't believe in past lives, they believe in heaven. Doesn't matter. To me, we're living life with our loved ones, with our friends, with our work colleagues, with whoever, with the Seattle Seahawks, whoever, now in the present, right? You referenced that, sorry. But and then as estate planning professionals, what's the takeaway? The takeaway is we need to be skilled in how to connect with our clients on their level. So in their belief system, so they feel connected with us. And the more connected with us that they feel, the us here, that they feel, the more likely they're going to listen to you, they're going to hire you, and they're going to listen to your advice, and they're going to be better off for it. Okay? So, questions? I hope this has been helpful, at least interesting. Right? Questions, anything? Questions? Yes?
Are there any other characteristics, demographic or geographic or anything, that tend to make more people fall into one category than another?
Yeah.
Lifestyle, occupation, family situation, anything that
correlates to the 4 belief systems? I have not seen anything. I've worked with 27 people in 27 countries, every religion or no religion, doesn't matter. I got Hindus who believe in reincarnation who are petrified of dying. Makes no sense. Cognitively dissonant, right? It makes no sense. But it's just the reality, and who knows why? It is what it is, right? So my job is to help them reduce their fear and live more life now, more effectively and enjoyably now. So I haven't seen. I'll tell you. I was telling somebody at the reception. I'd say a ballpark is non-scientific number statistic, but 60% of my clients are under 35 years old. Millennials. I have a whole millennials page on my website now because of that. It's just like unbelievable. And so then I started doing some research in terms of why so many young people have fears around death and dying. And there are all kinds of studies. You can go on there. I linked to this University of Pittsburgh study, different studies about there's different reasons why they think that there's so much stress. General stress and then stress around death and dying, young people. But I have not seen any, I'd say that older, I'd say one thing is that people who are older, 65, 70, 80, 90 years old, they're at the point where they may still have fear. And I have an 82-year-old client I'm working with today and yesterday, right now. But more often than not, they've lived such a long life at that point that they've kind of resigned themselves to the fact of just physically letting go, So it's less acute. It may still be there. I think it's less acute than somebody who's 20 years old, Yes?
I confidently raised my hand saying that I was in number 3.
Oh, yeah.
But I think actually that I have to admit that if I were given a diagnosis of being terminally ill, I'm thinking that I would probably be in 2.
Yeah.
I can say intellectually now.
Yes.
I don't fear death, but I haven't been faced.
It's a really good point.
But I think I still have to live my life fully now. But I'm pretty sure I'm going to be in transition.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for being candid. It's not easy to do. But I think that, I think more of my experience working with people, so many hundreds and thousands of people now, I think more people think they don't have a fear until they're faced with it. And then it rears its ugly head. And so that's why my nonprofit mission is to help people talk about this more openly, at least at first. Talk about it, right? Yeah.
So how do you, just given that comment,
Yeah.
kind of square that off with the increasing suicide rates of non-terminal patients, of just people? I mean, it's been interesting, both young and old. And so where do they fit in that spectrum? Is that part of their decision, or
High suicide rate, is he's asking about high suicide rates and so forth, and how does that fit in here? Man, that's complicated, right? Because high suicide rates could be a lot of different factors, causative factors, right? I work with a number of clients who have had suicidal ideations, and first thing is I will make sure that they have medical care and support and so forth, because that's not what I do. First, I tell people I'm not a therapist, I'm not a doctor, and it's not what I do. So then I'm working with them along with their psychotherapist and/or their psychiatrist, right? And my experience with those clients is that it is all over the place. I mean, there's not one thing in terms of demographics or socioeconomics or any particular reason or whatever. Upbringing, upbringing in terms of fearful upbringing can obviously exacerbate anything, right? Fear of death, anything. Let's just, I don't know why we started to see a higher incidence. Yeah. I don't know. It's not my area of expertise. I help them get out of it. But yeah. Other questions? Yes, Sarah.
Recently in Seattle, we hosted a medical conference on the use of psilocybin, magic mushrooms, for people who are dying. And they found this connection between taking psilocybin and losing forever any fear of death.
I've heard of that.
You've heard of it?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
You haven't been eating mushrooms or anything?
Not my thing. There was a time in my life, which has long since passed, where I might have.
It's kind of fascinating.
Yeah. No. Look, here's the thing. Bottom line, I like to take a more natural approach, which is why I teach the meditation technique. And I was a test subject in the very first medical studies ever done in the United States in 1971. So I was a teenager at the time. Those of you know Herbert Benson, doctor, relaxation responses, cardiologist, Boston, Beth Israel Hospital in Boston, etc. So I was in Herb's, I know it was Herb, because I helped him set up lectures and everything and so on. So I was in that experiment. Here's the thing, change blood chemistry, brain chemistry. That's what those drugs are doing. That's what the mushrooms are doing. So can you do it naturally? Absolutely. So I choose to take the natural approach. Yeah. One last one.
Yeah, one last, that's right.
Yeah.
What do you find is the value of sort of grouping into 4 belief systems versus just recognizing each person is going to have their own belief system? What's the value of the 4 belief
Yeah,
systems?
the value of the 4 belief systems, for me anyway, is to kind of figure out where the person is at, and then I emphasize, I look through their lens, and I mainly talk through their lens. And I ignore the other ones, quite frankly. I'm not there to try to persuade them to believe in past life, if they're in the first belief system, or the second belief system, third belief, so that's the way I use it. For you folks, I'm just throwing an idea at you, to use the 4 belief systems as a way to kind of, you listen for that kind of language that I was suggesting there, and that will kind of think, oh, they're more first. Okay, then I better not talk about the afterlife. I better not talk about stay away from that. And then just to kind of give you some heads up, basically listen for it, give you a heads up to how you can not step on their toes, or how you can talk to them and kind of wrap your mental, psycho-emotional arm around them, so to speak, by saying, hey, yeah, I knew somebody who had something like that.
Kelvin, thank you so much. I know, I think